All right. So welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. The chat should be open, so if you have any questions or anything like that, you're free to sort of go ahead and start typing in there. If anybody wants to give me a sound check, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'm going to start going on. I did just check the sound myself, and it seemed to be just fine. All right. So welcome to this sort of a more, speculative sort of talk. The idea here is to give, or share some of the thoughts that I've been having regarding the actual, AOSP and what's been going on with the AOSP over the past year or so, and where I think things might actually sort of be going. So I was, to be honest with you, kind of a bit uncomfortable putting this presentation together, not really clear whether I should be doing this or not, because it's not the usual technical content that I actually sort of cover. Rather, it is sort of a trying to read what's going on with the AOSP, what's going on at Google, where's the market sort of going with this, and trying to sort of stir the discussion there a bit, see if we can get some interesting, convergence of thoughts on where we should be going with all that. All right. So I'll put the slides up after the presentation sometime this afternoon, my time. I'm on the East Coast, so whatever. All right. For those of you not familiar with my work, I wrote the embedded Linux book for O'Reilly in the early 2000s, the embedded Android book for O'Reilly about 10 some years ago, and I'm most widely known in the Linux community for having written the Linux Trace Toolkit, which was one of the first tracing tools for the Linux kernel, and you can still find my name here and there in the kernel. Anyway, that's sort of like the technical credibility here that I could pull in if you want. By no means do I know everything, and I certainly don't have the competence to claim that I know where the market's going, but I've been around a while, so there's some things that seem to actually, be off in terms of where AOSP is going, and let's see what this could actually possibly mean. So what have we seen recently with AOSP that's a bit concerning for people working on the platform, which essentially is most of the people that I work with, working on making devices based on Android. So they're closing up the main branch, so essentially the main branch, which is where Google was publishing the tip of their development for the open source side of things, now has been sort of put behind essentially the Google firewall, if you will. And that doesn't mean they're not releasing code, it's just they're releasing it in a different way, they're releasing it at a different cadence. You can go read the blog post at aospdevs.org about that. There's been a good job there done on explaining what's going on with this. The other thing is that the Pixel devices are gone from the tree. And the Pixel devices being gone from the tree is kind of a bit weird because they've been there all along, or at least the lead devices from Google have been there all along. I think there was Brian Swetland, who was one of the early engineers in the Android team, was sort of commenting on LinkedIn that he thought he was kind of like confused by this. It's like that is something that he insisted upon having in the early days, at least if I recall correctly his comment, and it's kind of a bit strange that it's now gone. Some folks on LinkedIn commented a couple of things, like Al Sutton commented that the backports seem to be slowing down for the security fixes. Stefan Langfeld sort of was commenting that there's some of the features on csdown.radar.com that seem to be scaled down. And just this week at the Qualcomm summit, there was an announcement that essentially they're rebasing or rebaselining, the term that was used, Chrome OS on top of Android. So in other words, kind of like it'd be a skin on top of Android, if at least my understanding of what that sort of implies in terms of architecture redesign. So there's a few things that are changing, and maybe I missed a few. All right. So again, the chat's open. If I missed anything in there, feel free to shoot there. I'm happy to pick it up live and add it along the way while I'm actually talking. Now, this is not the first time around where things have been rocky in the AOSP. I've been in here long enough that I can sort of recall cut a few things. I mean, usually what I'm interested in, strategically speaking, for a project, an open source project, is to see the actual brains in and out the door, who's leaving, and why are they leaving. So of course, over the time line that Android's been around, it's been around for 20 years. I mean, that's a long time, right? So there's a couple of things that have happened. Andy Rubin, who's the founder, had left. Jean-Baptiste Carew, who is the maintainer of AOSP, left. Brian Swetland, as I was saying here, one of the very early engineers, and a couple of other key folks have sort of departed the scene along the way. I mean, it's sort of a kind of natural thing. I mean, so you spend like 2 decades on or at least a decade and a half, or even a decade on some project. At some point, you want to see some other stuff. Like people today, a bit surprised maybe with the stuff that's been going on with the AOSP, but there's actually even more drastic stuff that happened in the past. When Google was trying to sort of re-engineer Android to get it to be tablet grade, they actually made the release there closed source. Honeycomb 3.x was never available in source, and as far as I know is not available right now. If you go back to the sort of press discussions about this back then, people were freaking out. It's like, oh, Google's going closed source now that they've got their success. Goodbye for Android, that sort of kind of thing, right? But the promise was that they would later come out with something that would actually have both the phone and the tablet form factor merged into one, and they did. 4.0 did exactly that, right? And other things like dropping the Blue Z stack, or at some point some people were complaining that more and more stuff were being put in the Google mobile services instead of being open source. So there is precedent of weird things happening in AOSP. That's not sort of unusual in and of itself. Of course, it doesn't sort of necessarily take away the concern people have with what's going on now, but historically speaking, there have been other situations where some weird things have been happening. So I thought we'd sort of step back here and sort of think about what has been essentially the evolution of Android over time. So if you recall that when we started off, or when Android started off in the mid 2000s, most of the phones out there were either feature phones, or on the high end you had something like a BlackBerry, right? And of course iOS just launched a bit earlier than Android, but Android caught up quite quickly. So we start off with phones that were really kind of underpowered. These were not the sort of supercomputers that we have today. And so why did Google sort of get involved in that to begin with? There was a shift, as you might know if you were around at the time, from desktop to mobile, and the sort of danger there was that people were going to sort of forget using Google altogether if the phone was going to be their primary user interface. And at the time, the players that controlled this mainly were the network operators and a few sort of operating system providers, of which, of course, Google was not a player. And so, to their credit, they recognized this was a threat and therefore sort of decided to move ahead of that, and made it such that Android became one of the foremost mobile operating systems out there, and it was a good play. I mean, they effectively became like the other player in this ball game. I mean, if you sort of look at it from a just a split market perspective, but I mean overall, they have the biggest footprint in terms of smartphones out there, which is pretty amazing. So along the way, things have changed, right? We went from single core 32-bit ARM to multi-core 64-bit ARM, to essentially phones that are absolutely amazing in terms of the actual capabilities they have when you compare them to even sort of desktop systems. I mean, some of this stuff is just incredible. And it leads us to the situation where effectively the handset, as the modern day handset, becomes kind of like the standard starting point for a lot of designs. It's like this thing is a phone, but it doesn't have that, or it's a phone has this instead, right? So a lot of devices designed out there these days are trying to mimic in some way or have feature equivalence with what a phone is. Of course, Android is open source and is a good fit for that. But one of the questions that we'd have to ask ourselves today is how far more evolution are we actually anticipating in this glass slab, right? I've got a nice camera, I've got a nice screen, I've got internet connectivity. What more am I going to be looking for, right? Yes, okay, cameras are going to continue getting nicer. Maybe the device is going to get thinner. I'm going to get longer battery life. I'm going to have snappier interaction with the device. But in terms of the actual overall feature set, it seems, at least in terms of evolutionary path, that we've plateaued. And you can see that being reflected into the actual sort of what's going on with the evolution within the AOSP itself. So within the AOSP itself, if you look back at the past few releases from, I would say, 10 to where we are, 16, the number of radical changes that have happened within the stack are not as big as before. We've not had anything close to, say, Project Trouble, which was 8, where they sort of revamped how the whole hardware actually works. Yes, there was GKI that was introduced in 11, a couple of other interesting features since then, but in terms of actual overall architecture, it's been pretty stable over the past few years. All right, so if you zoom out even further than that, right? So what's the role that Android's actually playing in the tech stack, or if you sort of melt down all the categories into one? And when I started off in the Linux business in the late 90s, right? Linux was just about to go mainstream, and very soon thereafter, essentially, it exploded into the embedded market. I mean, there was a lot of companies in the early days trying to capitalize on this, but it eventually became kind of like just a grassroots movement where people were just taking Linux and spreading it in all sorts of things. And this is where kind of I started off with the first book I mentioned, the embedded Linux book I had written for Riley, and had a lot of really interesting conversations with a lot of customers, helped a lot of people take Linux and put in all sorts of wacky devices, and still do. But around the mid 2000s, I sort of got off and worked on a startup for a couple of years. And when I left off, the thing that I found was really missing in the Linux world, or the use of Linux in embedded systems, was actually user interface. And there was a few candidates, but nothing really serious, right? And essentially, what Android did is solve that, right? It came in and gave an actual amazing user experience on top of the Linux kernel for, as we know, handsets, and then now, a whole bunch of different things. If you just look at the canonical sort of things that Google's got, the tablets, the watches, the XR, the whatever, and so on. So the whole kind of use cases that are official, and then on the unofficial side, Android's been put so many devices. It's incredible. The kind of things, the designs that I've seen over the years and helped customers sort of bring to fruition. So one of the questions today, of course, being sometimes asked is, do I even really need Android? Microcontrollers are getting more powerful. There was a presentation recently by Qasim, a good friend from TI, who is sort of just stirring the question, do we really need Android? MCUs are getting really powerful here. Should I be using this? The other thing that people have always wondered about Android, and which sort of also touches on the changes that have happened over the last year, is the risks that people are actually taking by using something like Android, right? And the two main risks have always been the same. They have not changed. I mean, whenever something fundamental happens in the middle of the AOSP, they kind of surface back up. But these risks have always been there. What if Google goes closed source with it, or what if they just drop the ball, right? And yes, okay, those risks have been there, but the mitigation of it has always been the same. It's open source. If they drop it, you just go on, and you're not alone. There's many people who are actually using this. There's a critical mass of app developers, a huge, ecosystem of app developers. There's a lot of people who don't know how to put this on the platform. And there are historical precedents of actual sort of projects being dropped by the company that was steering them and then being picked up and continuing on, right? Firefox and LibreOffice are two examples that came off the top of my head, but there's probably other ones as well, right? And if you don't count the innumerable sort of contributions that have made to existing open source projects, being the Linux kernel or otherwise, for which the original companies just disappeared. So this risk, those risks have always been there. I don't think that any of what happened last year changes much of it. And the bargain has always been this: the device developers could always walk away with the code, right? It's open source. If the developer doesn't, if the platform developer or the manufacturer doesn't like what Google's doing, they can just take the thing and walk away. And if Google did disappear from the scene because they don't want to maintain it anymore, because they want to go closed source with it, whatever it is, at the end of the day, there's no reason there isn't an open source organization that takes actually this and moves forward, right? And there are also precedents for that. And I'm sure there's many of the actual existing sort of players in the Android ecosystem who would probably become sponsors of such an organization. This is always sort of a possibility that can happen, right? So the question is, where are we going into the future, right? And this sort of dictates what's happening with Android from my perspective, at least. And I don't know. Maybe you haven't figured it out, but there's a lot of hype about AI, and it's not just hype. All right, this is a serious actual paradigm shift that's happening in the computer world. Regardless, I mean, it's to the same level as adoption of at least I've been around using, this stuff for since the late '80s, early '90s. So it's on par with the adoption of the internet, adoption of mobile. It's a major paradigm shift. All right, so this has ramifications for everybody, including the company that's steering the project that some of us are depending on. In this case, Google and Android. So what does that mean for Google in the immediate, right? What does the sort of essentially mean also for Android? So Android has always been a protection around the core business that Google has. I mean, that's the whole reason they got into this, right? They got into this because they didn't want to have essentially the rug pulled under their feet from people getting free access to essentially their site. But the problem now is, what if people aren't actually even thinking about going there first? That's a completely different problem, and one that must be worrying to people in Mountain View. There's been some publications out there on the sort of possible sort of decreasing or flatlining of visits to the site. There was I think it was an article on Wall Street Journal from some Apple executive that was saying something to that effect. Anecdotally, me as an individual, I see young people using devices, and I see ChatGPT being often used. That cannot possibly not appear on somebody's radar in Mountain View, California, and there's got to be some concern, right? And so if you sort of try to read through some of the stuff that's going out there, it seems that it's kind of like all bets are going towards AI. And to a certain extent, my feeling is some of the things that we've seen with AOSP over the past year probably fall under this category. It's like, okay, we've got a mature technology here, this thing works well, we got a huge ecosystem for it. Do we really have to be that aggressive onto how we're working on this? Or maybe we redirect some resources to this AI thing, which is existential for us. So maybe that's some of the things that we're seeing. Again, I have no sort of privileged information here, so this is just kind of jogging my mind based on what I'm actually sort of seeing. Of course, they have, and you can read this. It's been published around. They have more strict policies regarding their staff and that sort of business. So it seems to be like, okay, we're circling the wagons here. We've got to get through this, right? That seems to be kind of like the sort of strategy ongoing right now. And I kind of understand it. It's totally justifiable if you're running a business, right? So where is AI actually going? It feels like it's going everywhere. People are pushing it even without understanding where they're going with it, right? There's mandates from high-level CEOs. They're like, we need to use AI. For what? Well, we don't know, but we just push AI, right? So everything needs to be recast from the perspective of what AI can have as an impact on every side of every business possible from top to bottom, right? So the problem with AI, of course, is cost of infrastructure. You can sort of read the stories out there of the investments that are actually happening in this field, circular economy, with companies investing in other companies that end up purchasing the products of the company investing from. Anyway, weird stuff. But sorry, above my pay grade, as they say. But at the end of the day, the cost of the actual back end stuff is astronomical, right? The chips are super expensive. Holding this infrastructure is insanely costly, and the monetization strategy is TBD, right? At this stage of the game, it seems to be just grab as many users as you can, and we'll figure it out later on. All right, that seems to be kind of like the way things are going. And the interesting thing that I'm seeing actually or reading up on recently is all this business about agentic AI, and the idea of having an agent of any kind, right? Something you talk to, something you interface with, something integrated in one of the apps that that allows sort of like a one-on-one sort of conversation, if you will. There was a recent paper by some folks at NVIDIA. I could probably put the link later on up there. Yeah, I think I have it here right on my desk. So small language models are the future of agentic AI. Kind of a pretty recent, mid-September publication, where essentially they go through and make the case that small language models, essentially, miniature AIs, if you will, that run on the edge, if you will, are the future of where AI is going. And they make a good case of it. I have some points later on that I'll point out in that regard. So there was a recent also a press release by Google and Qualcomm that they're working towards this sort of thing, ability to just talk to your device live on the device itself. You've seen the Androidify application being announced, which is kind of like you take a picture of yourself and they make a robot using AI that looks like you, an Android robot that looks like you. I think last week they announced that you can actually talk to Google Photos now to edit your actual pictures. There's a whole flurry of announcements that were made at the actual Qualcomm summit this week as well. There's a whole bunch of things that are going sort of in this direction of, okay, we're going to try to push AI like everywhere, even to the edge devices themselves. So what does currently, Android provide in this area, right? So what's found in Android regarding, agentification, whatever it is that you sort of, however you want to phrase it, or you want to, whatever term that it lands on, right? So you've got the Google Assistants. This is the classic OK Google thing, which is simplistic, kind of does the job. It's not super fancy, for example, I got in my car and I speak to it sometimes, like, okay, forget it. You didn't get what I was saying. Forget it. Let me repeat, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just it's got its limitations. And of course, they're also pushing Gemini to do similar things. There is, as I was just explaining, per application sort of integration of AI, like Androidify and Google Photos and probably some other things that I'm missing from Google and otherwise. On the app developer side, the neural network API that was introduced in 8 has been deprecated in 15, and currently what they seem to be pushing is two things: TensorFlow Lite for machine learning, on the actual sort of device, and then AI Core, which provides generative AI, or Gen AI as they call it, through Gemini Nano on the device itself, right? Not actually sort of cloud-based. And of course, there's always the Firebase API to call into Gemini, which is of course sort of remote and in the cloud with whatever tokenizations they've got. On the platform level, they announced this thing called AI Core, which is a new system service that's supposed to be integrated to provide all this functionality. I've not found it in AOSP. So if this is in the AOSP, maybe I didn't search in the right place, but I couldn't see it running and I couldn't find it in the code. So if it's in there, hey, point it out in the comments or afterwards anywhere. Again, I didn't look too hard for it, but when I looked in the usual framework-based services thing, it wasn't there. There is the neural network HALs that are there. Those seem to be not deprecated though, according to what I'm reading on source.android.com. But let's take this let's do a thought exercise here and think about what could we go to, right, in terms of usability if we have an agentic system in our phone? There's something I can talk to, something I can actually entertain. And by the way, I'm saying phone here because it's the primary sort of target for Android, but spread this out to other things like my car, my tablet, my watch, whatever have you, right? So what if my device is my friend, right? I can actually talk to it and maybe even confide in it. I mean, a lot of people use ChatGPT for all sorts of personal discussions and things like that. But one thing that could be really interesting is to actually interface with my phone in even just a vocal thing. It's like I might be driving my car and say, okay, what's in my inbox this morning? Please read me the email titles or whatever goes through it. Oh, yeah, okay, please open the email from Phil, read me what he's saying, and even compose the actual answer on the fly. That'd be actually really cool. Maybe some of the stuff sort of exists in limited fashion, but think of it as a general sort of thing overall of everything my device has, not just specific to an application, not just integrated in one app, but really an overall experience of interfacing with my thing for doing things. Like, okay, I could also be driving and, hey, pull up this Google Doc, read me the second paragraph, oh, make this edit, please, and then send it back to Molly's for review, right? Or even sort of something as common as, I'm doing a task, I'm sort of maybe hanging my TV on the wall or, doing some renovations, just ask the thing and it just finds you a YouTube video and locates the proper section of the YouTube video that's relevant to which you want interested in, and so on. And there's even an actual, I just saw, what is it? I was pitching this to some people just to have as a sort of casual conversation around friends and stuff, and saying, hey, we could do that, and that'd be great to do that. And then the last week, I think, or like the week before, there's a startup called I think it's called Hey Blue that does something similar to that, or they have this sort of edition as a USB HID that they put underneath the phone that essentially sort of takes control of the UI and then allows you to do something like this. Just go through tell it to do certain things, and it goes and does it from the top of the actual UX. Think of this further down. I mean, if agentic UI, if you want, comes on top of everything that we already know, then there's no reason this doesn't spread to a lot of other devices that I'm using, right? There's no reason I'm not talking to my thermostat, to my appliances, to my car, to what have you. I mean, this then becomes sort of just like me walking into a room and talking to one of the things that's in the room and having it react. There's no reason this isn't happening. There's no reason we're not going there, because the capabilities are more or less, close to close at hand, right? If they're not there already, if you actually want to put the effort. You can take this even further. I mean, you can go really wacky with this stuff and say, hey, you know what? Let's skin this over, right? Let's actually sort of use some, known sort of AIs from sci-fi movies that we're familiar with, and actually have the voiceover with this thing, right? Imagine you just got off the elevator and you're waiting for your ride and your ride's late and you scream at your phone, hey, Bishop, right? That sort of stuff. It could be funny, but just saying, this sort of thing is not that far-fetched, right? In terms of what we could be able to do with these sorts of things. And then you can actually sort of go completely out of the box here and say, okay, forget the tech folks, forget us techies, right? Let's go grab some people from actual, sci-fi and movies and actually help us redefine what this experience should look like and blow people away. Aside from all the tech terms that we're used to, this could get very interesting in terms of the experience. So why is Android the right place for this? Well, 3.5 billion active users. That's like a huge chunk of the human population, right? And these people are using Android on a daily basis, right? The phones are more important to users than wallets and keys and a whole bunch of things. I mean, people are less likely to forget their phones than they are to forget a whole bunch of other things. And the phone is essentially the primary sort of computing device that people interface with. Yes, I might sit down on my computer for some time, but when I'm not, I'm walking around with my phone, right? And this is where it gets interesting. So this competition between the AI that's in the cloud, versus AI that can be on my device, right? And the small language models have really some interesting aspects to them. And again, sort of you can refer back to the NVIDIA paper that was published the other week for a bit more sort of a solid argument basis for that. But you know, one of the points they're making is that small language models are actually good enough for a lot of the things that LLMs are actually sort of credited for. And you know, they cost a lot less than the LLM for back-end players because it's running on your device, not on their infrastructure. It also works offline, which is something that still happens, you know, in the mobile world. You know, we still sort of run out of signal. I don't have Wi-Fi, what have you. It could be anything, right? It also works locally, so my data is not actually getting pushed to the cloud. That's something that's pretty interesting, actually, for anybody that wants to have a sort of an intimate relationship with some AI agent, so their data set doesn't go to anybody, it stays on the actual device itself. And of course, the latencies can be very interesting, right? I'm running local on my device, not sending this off to the cloud, waiting for the cloud to come back to my prompt and whatever else. And one of the points that's interesting, that's made in the paper I was mentioning, is that they actually were sort of pointing out that the current SLMs tend to actually catch up to like previous generation LLMs. Right, so that's actually pretty interesting, and they have some numbers in there that you can look it up, which means that, you know, as we move forward, you know, the capabilities that we attribute today to, you know, the Geminis and ChatGPTs of this world could actually find themselves kind of in my pocket within some sort of, you know, near future, if you want, right? And you can still use the actual backend as an offloading engine. It's like, okay, well, this request the user is making is way too heavy for me to process locally. Let me shift that out to the backend and actually pay the cost of the calculation, right? And then you can also sort of aggregate those things together, which is like, okay, there's multiple SLMs on my device. This one's good for this, you know, thing. I can run it here, offload it to something else, and go on from there. And so what, you know, do we need in a device to be able to support this sort of thing? Well, pretty much everything that Android actually already provides us. I mean, this, you know, extremely rich operating system, ecosystem, and whatever, internet connectivity, rich API, the whole thing. I mean, everything that Android provides fits straight into that sort of feature set that you would need to actually accommodate that sort of user experience. And in my view, there's just really no other contender actually than Android that can actually pull this off. I mean, this really is a situation where it's Google's place to lose. You know, they have both sides of the equation. They have the back end and they have the actual on-prem, or, you know, in pocket, if you will, my pocket being the premises, solution that can be combined and do the really interesting thing of offloading costs to the device as much as possible, instead of actually incurring the cost on the back end, right? And this is where, you know, if you want to play nasty, you can get into a platform power play. You know, this could be like, without, you know, wishing anybody anything bad, but this could be OpenAI's Netscape moment. Like, okay, well, we own the platform. Yeah, you were there first, but hey, you know what? We own the platform. So that's sort of where things can get interesting, right? Because Google has that platform that they're able to push this technology through to users directly, right? So, as I said, you know, at the onset, I don't have any sort of ready-made answers, and I'm sort of a bit uncomfortable talking about those sorts of things because it's not a deeply technical topic, right? But we can sort of make informed observations and ask questions about what's going on and where are we actually sort of going with all this. So overall, I think that what's clear to me is change is coming. I mean, regardless of what part of the computing business you're in, this wave is actually going to come, right? Or is, you know, coming right now. And the threat for everybody is real. And that includes, of course, you know, Google. But this is not the first time Google has had to face this. I mean, remember, the whole point of Android was to actually face the transition, the possible foreseeable transition from desktop to mobile, and they've successfully navigated that. We are here today. they still have Android. So and the same thing with iOS. You know, they're fighting it out without iOS for the past 20 years. Google's got whatever 75% of the market share for smartphones. I mean, that's huge. I mean, this is pretty significant, right? So from that perspective, there is precedent, right, for actually Google to fend this off. And ultimately, well, not only is Google going in the right direction, but ultimately this is a technology like all other technologies that becomes a commodity, right? It will be at some stage not so exceptional to actually have this sort of functionality at your disposal. And then at that point, when you're talking commoditization, it's all a question of cost. The question becomes who can reduce their cost the most. And in that game, given that Google has both sides of the equation, they're fairly well positioned, from my perspective, to have an edge on what they could do with this, right? So what doesn't make sense to me, though, that's the part where I have kind of like a big question mark, right? If Google is indeed trying to win this game, right, and we understand that edge devices can be pivotal in this play, right, and that we know that phones are the primary user interface, then I don't understand why Google is possibly scaring or alienating platform developers. That part's hard for me to understand, because those moves they've done, like removing the Pixel devices, pulling out the main branch and those sorts of things, I mean, they're hitting people's radars, and people are asking questions like, what's going on here? And if you're trying to win this, then you definitely want people to put this operating system in every single device they can get their hands on, not just phones, right? You want my thermostat to run this. You want my washing machine to run this. You want my oven and fridge to run this, right? You want everything to run this, so that is my main AI experience is Androidified, right? That is a winning strategy right there, and it's at Google's disposal, right? And the deal is, of course, Android is open source, right? And if sort of Google doesn't get in front of that and make it possible to actually put this thing in that variety of devices, then maybe somebody else does, right? And that, what Google has had as a power over Android is its commitment and speed of development, right? The only reason nobody's ever taken AOSP and forked it and went, speeded ahead of Google is actually Google's pretty good at actually sort of pushing stuff into AOSP and getting really nice innovations into it and making it available for people to package this in all sorts of devices, right? From my perspective, the idea, if you want to actually get ahead of the curve, is then to make sure that this is the primary sort of operating system for people to put in any device, as I was saying, that needs this sort of interface, which is where users will eventually expect their devices to be, and where an MCU just won't cut it, right? It's going to take you it's going to take you for a foreseeable future, fairly beefy SoC to actually run this sort of load with a fairly rich operating system like Android that can handle this sort of load to deliver on those devices the experiences that users will in the future, I think, expect to find as they start finding them on their devices. Like they've expected to find touch devices when you go to a point of sale because the thing is a touch phone, right? The phone is a touch-based device. So from my perspective, I think and obviously, I am not sitting in Mountain View, California. I don't have the actual decision-making in my hands, but I would say that I think that one of the things I would recommend is probably just, stop cutting this AOSP stuff and just make sure that it's clear to everybody that you're committed to this. Put the Pixel devices back in there, and make sure that everybody that works on the platform is confident that you're sort of doubling down on this. Actually, it's an all-in game from my perspective for pushing this user experience to everybody. And that's pretty much what sort of, again, I don't have any sort of ready-made answers. I got opinions which are worth whatever, and open-ended questions. But that's sort of pretty much what I've had to share on this front from my perspective. So in sort of, in recap, I'm not sort of extremely worried about what I'm seeing in AOSP in the last year. There has been worse stuff happened since Android was launched. I think we're at a very interesting juncture, and I sort of understand maybe some people are jittery. That kind of makes sense as well. But definitely looking to the future, if we believe AI is the future, and definitely sort of if you look at what people are doing with it, it's exploding. Then being able to sort of get this stuff, in people's hands in an easy way, I think is the goal here, and hopefully, this is something that Google is open to, and put as much of this core AI stuff as possible available even for open source solutions that are based on this. That's definitely something that helps in that direction as well. I mean, from my perspective, Google has a winning hand. It just has to play it well. Thank you. Right. Thank you, Amit. So yeah, and that's pretty much it for me. I mean, I don't have much more to add than that. Maybe I'm completely left the field. And if so, please, say so in the comments. I'm open to being shown wrong. And if you know better, then by all means, you know how to reach me. I'm sort of not too far away. Yeah, and if there's any questions here, I'm happy to take them on the chat as it goes. I'll leave you a minute here for maybe some questions to come in, given that we're streaming and there's a bit of a deferred delay here, and then we'll cut it off there. Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Appreciate it. Yep, you're welcome. All right, folks. So I think I'll wrap it up here. Once again, if you're watching this into the future, then feel free to comment in the YouTube comment section, and I'll try to see if there's anything in there that needs to be picked up. All right. What do I think about the app dev verification thing? Yes. Okay. So that's sort of a tangential topic, but kind of interesting still. As you may know, Google now has required or requires that all applications, whether they're side-loaded or published in the store, to be signed by app developers that are verified with the Google developer program in some way, shape, or form. This has prompted F-Droid to sort of pull the panic button. F-Droid is an actual open source store for phones, by the way. So I am guessing there's probably some sort of, kind of legal reason they're doing this. There's got to be some sort of ramification to why they want those applications to be, applications to be signed by verified developers and such. What I don't get, and I think I pointed out on this on LinkedIn, is that all of a sudden, every project that's just a house project or basement project or a school project now needs the developer to sort of get some verification from Google. That sort of doesn't make any sense to me. Like, let's say Android's being used for a school project, right? And you have to hand in an assignment. And for whatever reason, the terms of service make it such that your verification gets invalidated the week before you sort of have to hand in your project. That's like weird, right? There's got to be some way, I don't know what it is. Surely there's a mechanism to sort of make this simpler. It seems strange, but this is sort of thing where a decision is made by a company and they can't justify it publicly for all sorts of reasons, and I kind of get that. So there's we're not holding all the cards on this. I'm not sure exactly what the full justification is for that, but surely there's got to be some technical means to kind of provide get out of jail card. I don't know what that is, but that's my hope, is that they find something for that. All right, cool. Well, thank you all. I'll wish you a good day, and hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.